On Saturday, February 22nd, I'll be hosting a virtual event titled Dancing with Darkness, a descent into the vital mystery of light and shadow. This gathering will feature a storyteller, 2 visionary talks from past guests of this project, Ganga Devi Braun and Dajealo, as well as a live conversation between myself and Samuel Adams, who will soon be featured on an upcoming episode of the project. Guided by the wisdom of 3 remarkable women and enriched by an intimate dialogue between 2 men, this event promises to offer soulful explorations, profound insights, and thought-provoking inquiries into navigating life's inevitable shadows with more depth, creativity, and reverence. Each voice will illuminate different facets of the intricate dance between shadow and light, followed by interactive Q&A sessions where you can engage directly, ask questions, and reflect on the insights shared. Together we will journey into the fertile dark, emerging with renewed curiosity, inspiration, and a deeper sense of awe for the mysteries that lie within. A recording will be available with every ticket purchase, so you can access the content again at any time after the event. So follow the link in the show notes and join us on this virtual descent into the vital mystery of light and shadow. Welcome to Wild Heart Revival, a gathering place for heartfelt conversations and stories as pathways of renewal and revival. I'm your host, Tay Tayari, and today's guest is Darcia Narvaez. Darcia is a professor emerita of psychology at the University of Notre Dame and fellow of the American Psychological Association, American Educational Research Association, Association for Psychological Science, and the American Association for the Advancement of Science. Born in Minnesota, she grew up living around the world as a bilingual, bicultural Puerto Rican, German, American, but calls Earth her home. Her earlier careers include professional musician, business owner, classroom music teacher, classroom Spanish teacher, and seminarian, among other endeavors. She uses an interdisciplinary approach to studying evolved morality, child development, and human flourishing. Her most recent books include Restoring the Kinship Worldview and The Evolved Nest, Nature's Way of Raising Children and Creating Connected Communities. Her book, Neurobiology and the Development of Human Morality, Evolution, Culture, and Wisdom, won the 2015 William James Book Award from the American Psychological Association and the 2017 Expanded Reason Award. Her recent short films are Breaking the Cycle, The Evolved Nest, and Reimagining Humanity. She hosts the webpage evolvednest.org and serves as president of kindredworld.org. In this episode, Darcia invites us to rethink relationships, kinship, and child rearing through an ecological lens. We explore her research on the evolved nest and how it inspires more balanced, harmonious ways of living and growing together. We dive into the layers of nestedness, communal, intergenerational, and cosmic, revealing how these connections shape our well-being and communities. Darcia contrasts Western wisdom traditions with Indigenous wisdom traditions, offering a path toward balance, compassion, and true belonging. From the magic of breastmilk to the power of play, this conversation urges us to reconsider our place in the world and how we nurture ourselves, each other, and all of life. If you're new to the show, you might like to know that I'm a counseling psychologist with an online practice dedicated to supporting wanderers, wanderers, and edgewalkers. I offer individual, couples, and group counsel, as well as support around death and dying. To learn more, visit my website through the link in the show notes. And I also offer free insight calls, which provide a risk-free opportunity for us to connect, explore our alignment, and determine if we're a good fit to walk alongside each other during a pivotal time in your life. I'm generally open to connecting via video chat if you feel naturally drawn to do so, whether for guidance, curiosity, collaboration, or any other meaningful reason. So feel free to reach out at any time. If you haven't yet, I invite you to subscribe to Wild Heart Revival on your preferred podcast platform, and know that your likes, comments, ratings, and shares are not only deeply appreciated, they're vital for supporting the organic growth of these heartfelt conversations and stories. Now, let's nurture a more natural sense of nestedness together with our dear guest, Darcia Narvaez. You say, "From my first memories living around the world as a child, I was concerned about the well-being of children. I could not understand why the world was so unjust. What was wrong? Of course, I also thought something was wrong with me when I had episodes of frozen brain, when called to speak up in class. So I wondered what was wrong with me. My academic research journey brought me to the goal of finding out the answer to both questions. What was wrong with the world and with me? And then to figure out how to heal both myself and the world. The answer is that humanity forgot its millions-year-old wellness-informed pathway of nestedness." So I'd love to dive into nestedness, but before we do, could you just give us a bit of a historical feeling and context around young Darcia, and why were you drawn to children, and why do you think you had these sensitivities, and how did that lead you onto this particular pathway you've taken in your work and your research? I'd love to just have a bit of a background before we get into it today.
Sure. Well, thanks, Tay, for having me here. Yeah, I almost brought tears to my eyes. You're reading that quote because my earliest memory is of injustice towards my brother. Back in the day, in the 50s, it was normal for kids to get spanked, and I was daddy's favorite, the first girl in the family, and I just complained out loud, and I took my toy about my brother, and my dad, just in my perception, how I remember it, flew into a rage and beat him up. It was like, whoa, I didn't want that. I just wanted my toy. And so I got sensitized, right, to justice right then, at least in my view. Probably was sensitized earlier somehow, non-verbally, but yeah. And then we spent half my childhood was spent in other countries, several so-called third world countries, Mexico, Colombia, and Puerto Rico as well. And I saw kids my age who weren't in school. They were on street corners as I'm driving or walking by, selling gum, and in rags. And I couldn't, and then I'd come back, we'd go away for a year, come back for 2. And then I saw the wastefulness, the overabundance of materialism in the United States, and then the paltry amount for children my age elsewhere. So I could not understand that. It was just haunted me, and I would cry about it, and I still do. I think now I know more about what children are not receiving, more than the physical stuff, right? More than food and education. It's also the neurobiological aspects of loving care.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the painful gifts of spending time in so-called third world countries that are more poor, is that, especially when you're young, is that you get to see the real intense contrast of poverty, and if you do get to see that when you're young, it really does sensitize you to that. I think that was my experience, at least, spending time in Mexico as a young boy, and yeah, feeling like really heartbroken, seeing really dirty, kind of tattered, clothed children my age or younger selling little plastic toys or chiclets, gum on the street, and then you give them a few coins and they run over to their mom and give it to them immediately. And it's just so heart-wrenching at that age. And so it's interesting to hear that that was part of your experience, but as well that it was close to home too, witnessing your brother not being treated so well by your father. Um, so
And now I realize that in the United States, yeah, there might be a lot of materialism, but we're really impoverished
yeah,
socially poor is
yeah,
what we are. And that's even worse. I mean, by and large. Yeah.
yeah. Well, I agree, because when I was an adult, I went traveling over to Southeast Asia. I've been there a few times, and I remember the first time I was in this really poor area of Cambodia, and I was totally struck I was riding my bike through this neighborhood, and it was so poor, like tiny little metal shacks with so many people living in them. But I was in this neighborhood and I saw this family, extended family, sitting in the dirt, really dirty, and they look kind of not very healthy, but they were all laughing so purely, such pure laughter. And then there was children right around them, like kicking a rusted can around, also laughing and smiling. And I just had this moment of thinking, wow, I never see that in the neighborhoods that I grew up in Canada. Just like a group of 15 adults sitting out on the road, laughing with pure joy. And so it was a really important moment for me of realizing, oh, there's something so much deeper than the material wealth, this social fabric that really forms our psychology and shapes our soul's expression. It really, really matters. Yeah. So you
And
recognize, yeah, go ahead.
that Luther Standing Bear and other native elders have talked about the importance of sitting on Earth, on
Yeah.
Mother Earth, to get your energy and your strength, and barefoot on Earth.
Yeah.
So it's really a good thing to be dirty, and it's also an antibiotic, and protects against the insects, all the stuff we think, oh, dirtiness and Earth. It's kind of what our westernized culture has done to us, thinking that that's all bad stuff, but it's actually really good.
That's a really kind of strange, insidious thing that happened in the cultural paradigm. Like, this story of separation might be the kind of like over story of that, that really caused us to demonize natural processes, nature's expression, the connection to natural processes and more than human kin. Um, so did you recognize that at a real young age, and that was also part of your inspiration for the field of study that you eventually got into?
No, I don't think I recognized that aspect.
Okay.
Took a little more cognitive development or experience to
Mm,
see the bigger picture. Yeah.
mhm, mhm. So did it take the study to really begin to see in that way?
Well, I've always been troubled by humanity. So I think different pieces of the insights that I draw on today were picked up over the years, because I've had a number of different careers,
Mm,
so to speak, and you pick up a different insight and
mhm,
intelligence from those experiences.
mhm,
It just all comes together now in the concept of the evolved nest.
mhm. Yeah. So let's talk about nestedness. What does that really mean, nestedness? And yeah, let's wade out into those waters, and then I have some more specific questions.
Okay. All right. Well, I've spent a number of years talking about the evolved nest, and focusing in on early life experience of the importance of providing the evolved nest to the young, so that their neurobiology, all their structures of how their body and brain work, are actually species normal. And when you don't provide the evolved nest, you become abnormal in various ways, dysrhythmic, dysregulated, uncooperative, and you can't help it. That's just the way your body was not shaped well.
Mm,
So I'm going to come back to the details of the evolved nest. But we all need nestedness throughout life. So there's certain capacities or provisions for the babies that are needed, but we all need the rest of them. So there's that kind of developmental or communal nest that's I'll talk about in a minute. But then there's two other forms now I've written about recently, and one is a intergenerational or a horizontal nestedness, where you honor your ancestors, the ancestral wisdom that they've, evolution has done all these experiments, so to speak. And that's what the evolved nest is. It's like evolution figured all this out millions of years ago. Come on, people. And then the horizontal nestedness, the intergenerational, also is honoring future generations, not messing things up for them. You want to think about their well-being as well. And then there's what's called vertical nestedness or cosmic nestedness, where you feel really deeply connected to Earth and you follow Earth's ways, its the seasons, the daily circadian rhythms of, living as a member of the Earth community, as an Earthling. And then you also feel connected to the cosmos and feel, you're part of stardust. You are, part of the dynamic flow of the universe. So that's the full deep nestedness, those three things. So now I can tell you more about the one I've spent more time on, which is the developmental or communal nestedness.
Yeah, sure, please. Yeah.
Let me just make sure I can talk for a while. So the the evolved nest for young children involves soothing perinatal experience. That means mom feels supported during pregnancy, feels welcoming of the child's wanted, all sorts of rhythmic biorhythms and biochemistry is supporting optimal growth of that child. Then at birth, it's a soothing experience, it's not traumatizing. They follow the rhythms, the interpersonal dance between their hormones going back and forth under natural conditions. And so it's not very painful. And then it's ecstatic. I've had moms come into my classroom and tell us, oh, I wish I could give birth every year. It's so ecstatic, the experience, and most of the USians think, what? That's not what I see on TV. Right?
Yeah.
And so at birth and then post-birth, you don't conduct any painful procedures on the child. No circumcision, no goo in the eye that stings, no painful pricks and all, unless you're letting the mom breastfeed, which alleviates some of that. But so no separation either of baby and mom, because they're both geared up to, their reward systems are geared up to meld together in this very deep way that is embodied loving glue that we undermine all this stuff with medicalized birth. So that's one, soothing perinatal experience.
Yeah, so like it is so dramatic and traumatic to give birth to a child and then to immediately cut their umbilical cord, take them away, start doing things to them. Like, for this being's whole experience so far has been one with the mother. Like, there's been no separation at all. And then to just extract the child in that way, I mean, it's really horrific, actually. And it's mind-blowing that is a practice to separate and do all these procedures immediately, rather than just handing the child to the mother, umbilical cord intact.
That's right. The umbilical cord should be intact for probably 15 minutes. A lot of good stuff is being transferred, including oxygen, but also stem cells, iron to the baby. And so cutting it off is a disservice. It's actually a violation of birthright for that child. And so, yeah, the medicalized birth, though, is all about product and efficiency, getting the baby out as soon as possible so they'll induce the mother's labor if they think, oh, this is the due date. The doctor decided, but babies vary by 55 days how long they want to stay in the womb. So a due date is just a guess.
Yeah,
Everybody, you know,
of course.
but somehow we decided that we know better than nature. Nature just connection there, you know.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, that's just one example that just radiates out into so many different ways that modern cultures interact with the wildness of our being, the nature of our being.
Yeah, it's that fear of nature. It's the denigration of nature that's been around for a few millennia. Fearfulness is so deeply embedded, and then the disgust, right? It's all the patriarchy and the, you know, associating it with female things. No, no, which actually there's a lot of power there behind that. Women used to have all this power with their blood. But
Yeah.
anyway, that's number one is soothing perinatal experience, right?
Mhm.
And it has lasting effects. We know, you know, the brain is affected. The mom is stressed during pregnancy. That child is going to be more irritable, for example,
Mhm.
because their hippocampal, their stress response system has been set up to be threat reactive, you know, and easily triggered. And
Mm.
all sorts of these other things also, other traumas do that too as well at birth and after.
Mhm. Mhm.
And then in the hospital, they separate mom and baby. And then parents bring home the hospital practices of separating the baby from mom, you know, at night in their own room or their own bed. It's like, oh, this is contrary to being an animal, a mammal, but people don't want to know that. Right?
Yeah, right. That's Yeah, that is so wild to force separation in the night during sleep when a child is needing to feed throughout the night,
That's right.
and to wake up in the dark alone and to not be able to just immediately feed and find safety and comfort, familiarity, sense of home. I mean, I can't even imagine what kind of lasting impact that has on psyche
Yeah,
and
it's terrible.
body.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, so you mentioned mammals, reminding us that we are indeed mammals. We are animals, and so then we're in this shared lineage with all other mammals, and in fact, all other creatures of Earth. Um, but in the sense that we are in such close lineage with other mammals, we of course share so many patterns of nestedness, child rearing, with other animals. And so I'm very curious to hear from your studies and research, um, where you've uh, investigated how various animal species and have nurtured their young and fostered thriving communities. Like, what lessons do you think are the most urgently needed in our human systems of care and child rearing at this precious and precarious time in human and earth history?
Yeah, well, I in my neurobiology book from 2014, I contrasted indigenous wisdom traditions, which I call primal wisdom, and Western wisdom traditions in the Christian world. And they have a lot alike that you know, they both say that wisdom is a state of being. You have to be in the right state. It's not just a, you know, desire. You have to actually not have your fear system activated. You have to have a small ego, and you have to be open then to the divine energies of the universe coming in.
Mhm.
But the Western wisdom tradition was, there are two distinctive pieces that I pointed out. And one is that the Western tradition is all about, you know, compassion for other people, other humans, whereas the indigenous or primal wisdom is compassion for all of life, right?
Mhm.
That you are connected, completely connected all the time. And the other one is that the Western tradition is afraid of their animal nature, their animal desires, whatever it is. Whereas in the indigenous or primal wisdom, that's really key. You're afraid of losing your animal mind, your animal senses, your animal intuitions.
Mhm.
And in the indigenous communities, you're raising those instincts to be really smart, right? And so you help the child learn to follow their intuitions. You honor that child as a unique spirit that's unfolding over time, and you don't want to interfere. No punishing, because if you punish that child, of course, the child, you're now messing up their inner compass. They need to follow that compass, not follow you telling them what to do or afraid of being punished, right? And so that shapes then their intuitions, their ability to pay attention to the natural world and hear, the communications and understand them and be part of the earth community. And the Western world has just broken all that up because it's so afraid. I think it's because they miscared for babies, and babies would cry, and want, to breastfeed or whatever it was they needed. And then the Western world adults say, oh, see that? And St. Augustine said, oh, original sin. See how I wanted my mother's breasts. So it's like,
Whoa.
oh, really crazy stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm thinking how many indigenous traditions see humans as being the youngest species, that we are the babies of Earth, and so everything that we've learned has come from our older kin, the other animals and plants and elements of Earth. How do you see that in what you've learned about indigenous traditions and human development, like learning from the patterns of nature and integrating that into child rearing and community development?
Well, my most recent book with Gay Bradshaw, who's an animal specialist, she and I looked at different animal nests, and in each chapter, a different nest was focused on and a different aspect of the evolved nest. And then we link that to human nests and the effects on neurobiology. And so you can see then when you look at the different animal nests, they carry their children, their young all around all the time. They don't isolate them. They don't put them over there unless they're a predator, and they have different kind of milk for that, so they can go off and hunt. But we're social mammals, and social mammals need a lot of, cuddling and play and close connection and attention. And we are actually different from all the other animals. We resemble fetuses of other animals until almost 2 years of age. And so we need really an external womb experience, not just, you're out after 9-10 months. No, we got another couple years there to take care and provide immediate response of whatever the need is. So you have to be pretty wise with babies. You have to know what that looks like. The baby starts to make a face, you move in. Baby starts to go, whoa. They're feeling uncomfortable. The pain is starting. You move in and comfort them, right? Instead of waiting for them to cry, that's a late signal. But in the United States, that's just, you wait for that. Kind of like really detached kind of parenting is encouraged here, rather than attached, connected, always in arms.
Yeah, that's something I've noticed traveling through Asia and here in Guatemala, Central America. Like around here, the Mayan women, they always have their babies on their backs or like connected to them. Like whatever they're doing throughout their day, their child is there doing that thing with them. And so in that way, responsiveness becomes, I think, much easier, so much more attuned, because you're constantly in contact, like literal physical contact. You can feel every micro movement and change that's happening in your child and them in you. It's like this deep relational way of being. And in that way too, the child learns your patterns and your way of life. Like this is something I've thought about often. There's this notion that what did you say? Like there's this distance in child rearing in the West.
Detachment instead of attachment. Yeah.
Yes. And also there's this thing that I've noticed where lots of parents like organize so much of their life and schedule around their baby too. You have to make sure that they have their nap at this time. Everything's like kind of scheduled out and organized. But when I notice indigenous folks with their children, it doesn't seem to be that. It's more of like a flowing, fluid process. Another thing too is that children in Indigenous communities have contact with so many more people, such diverse range of adults, and aunties, uncles, grandma, things like that, that they're not just relying on their mother or their mother and father.
Right. Yeah. So I talk about or contrasted parent-centered child rearing, where you put them on your schedule and make them sleep alone. I got to go to work in the morning. I mean, parents are forced into this. Uh,
Mm,
and then there's child-centered, where you schedule everything around that child. But neither is good for the kid, really. Ultimately, for optimal development, the best is life-centered parenting or life-centered child raising, where the child's with you wherever you are, wherever you're working, wherever you're um, living, and you don't isolate them in their own room, their own crib, their own age group. They're mixed in with everyone else, right? And so they're always part of life, never disconnected, never left alone.
mm,
Yeah. So you're mentioning a couple, you mentioned allo parents, we call it, or other nurturers.
mm,
That's part of the nest, really important, because the child, especially the baby, is learning how to resonate with others, and they need to learn to resonate with different people in different ways. And that's really great for their sociality, their social intelligence. And that's something that we, again, forgot with really patriarchy, moving moms into the home alone with a child or children, and then thinking they were responsible for it all.
mm,
Um, yeah.
mm. Yeah. And what about play?
Yes, that's another one.
That's a
Uh,
huge one, right? Like
yes.
children playing not only with each other, but also with adults. And I remember when I was young, even, and I'm only 30, um, we were playing outside all the time. And I have siblings that are much younger than me, and I see them and their friends and how different it's become in terms of play. And that's concerning to me. Um, so I'd love to hear you talk about play and how that affects the development of young ones.
Well, just like other mammals, especially social mammals, we are intended to play, especially in childhood, but we, as in our indigenous cultures, the hunter-gatherer civilization that we still see in existence and can observe, they're always playing all day. They've got leisure most of the day, right? They don't work that hard. Uh, so everybody's playing and being silly and teasing and such. And so for young children, it's actually helping the brain grow. It helps the executive functions grow, which is your ability to stop and start action, to react to unpredictability, to observe consequences, understand consequences, your empathy for others. Because if you play and you don't pay attention to your playmate, and you're too aggressive, you bite too hard, if you're a puppy or a kitten, your playmate's going to stop playing with you. So you
Yeah.
have to learn these things, right? It's
Mhm.
reciprocal. It's a partnership of play. Really important. It has to be self-directed for this, optimally, not organized sports. That adults like everything under control. You can see that the parents of today are highly anxious from their own childhoods, where they were left alone, left to cry, left you know, uh, isolated. And so then they bring that forward, and they worry about their own children. They helicopter too much the children, and then they undercare for the babies. The babies are the ones that need you to be all there around and paying attention and keeping them
Mm,
calm. But they do it the opposite. Then they leave the baby alone. They're told it's fine, it's good. And then the child develops lack of confidence. They just can't do stuff. They don't want to, and they're disorganized or just uncooperative, all because of the babyhood they had. Uh,
mm, mhm, mhm,
so we have to get back to, but play. I recommend for adults who didn't get nested that play is the way to back. It helps you grow in the moment. It's this free play of chasing and playing tag or climbing trees together, or other things you do, wrestling, and that's actually growing your capacities to be responsive and empathic and stop and start your actions. So, but it has to be a child usually under age 7, because they're a little more free.
Okay. What happens there at age 7?
There's a cognitive shift.
Okay.
And that's usually when most societies have sent their children to school, if they do schooling, or they start to learn more of the adult activities more precisely. Because before then, you're kind of in this hypnagogic state of just flowing with, you just react. I mean, you're still connected to the spiritual realm that you came in from. And so you're a little more imaginative. You're just learning from whatever you experience. You're embodying it. You're taking it into your long-term memory about how to behave. And then there's a shift where you get more concrete, more attentive to details at around age 7. Now, I should say that boys mature more slowly, and they need more nurturing than girls because they have less built-in resilience, and they're more easily toxically stressed from social shame. And so you have to be really careful with boys, and lots of cuddles, lots of playing, lots of support systems around them until age 30.
Yeah. Well, tell us more about that, because that really resonated with me. I felt that when you said that, the toxicity of shame. Could you tell us more?
Yeah. So it's just puts you in the state of self-doubt, of and boys tend to, when they get, males tend to externalize, which means blame others if they feel dysregulated. So if something stresses you, the male is more likely to, like the husband, more likely to blame his wife. Well, you did it to me, right? Whereas it's just he's just dysregulated. Women, females tend to blame themselves. There's just this pattern, gender pattern, and so they get depressed. They think, "Oh, I'm stupid and dumb." So for males, I think they just get caught in a cycle of self-doubt, of anger and rage. The old systems get enhanced. We're born with the survival systems, and these are the system of rage, fear, panic to keep us alive. When you don't provide the nestedness, the nurture, those systems get enhanced to keep you alive, because you're left alone to cry. You're left alone without touch. What else do you have? You're not learning all the stuff that grows after birth.
Yeah, that's so important. I mean, I can recognize that in my own life. So it's with the lack of proper nestedness. It's really, is it like an immaturity or an underdevelopment in one's ability to regulate their nervous system and to seek out co-regulation in a healthy way?
Yeah, and it's also just the biorhythms in the brain. The biorhythms in the brain are just overdoing it or underdoing it. They're over aroused, under aroused, or they flip around. So that when there's something, that a new situation, you have a hard time having the right level of arousal in that situation. You get too excited or not excited enough. So you can tell that people who kind of overdo it or underdo it, or their arousal systems haven't been established well.
Yeah. And so that mainly has to do with like proper touch, holding, support. What are some of the main elements of that?
Yeah. So the evolved nest, we can identify these, anthropologists have identified these same characteristics all over the world in hunter-gatherer communities. So that's soothing perinatal experience, which I talked about.
Yeah.
Breastfeeding for several years. Every animal has a different kind of milk. So cow's milk is not set up for us. That's why kids get colic and get so upset their stomachs, they can't digest it properly.
That makes sense.
Yeah, when it's in formula. Breast milk is just this magical elixir. The mom's breasts create an antibody for whatever infectious agent is in the region that the baby's saliva is signaling.
Well,
It changes in the morning and at night. It's energizing in the morning and sleep inducing at night. And at night, it has tryptophan, which builds the brain, builds serotonin receptors. It's the precursor and it crosses the blood brain barrier at that time. It doesn't later on in life when you eat tryptophan, like turkey is in turkey. And so it's building the number of receptors you have for serotonin, which is linked to intelligence. It's also linked to not getting depressed. And so it's just this night milk is so, so important. And that's why you want to then co-sleep safely with your child or bed share, because then breastfeeding is so easy. But we have a lot of corporate interests in not making it easy. They want you to buy formula. They want you to buy a crib. They want you to do these things. And so it's just been corrupted, the advice to parents. Even though all over the world people bed share safely, right? We have for ever since we evolved.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's like encouraged to wean children off really early.
Yeah. Oh,
Typically, like it's kind of almost shameful in some parts of the Western culture to even breastfeed your child past like a year or 2 years, like,
yeah.
which is wild because can it go to like 5 years or something in indigenous cultures?
It's been observed till 8.
Till
And
8?
there's
Wow.
a woman who has a book out, breastfeeding older children, and she has them observed, or people tell her, till age 11. Now,
Wow.
this is probably just the night milk, night nursing, right? Which is giving, again, the brain its needed elements. But the average age of weaning that has been documented around the world in hunter-gatherer civilization is 4 years. And
Okay.
4 years, I think boys need more because the immune system is building itself from breast milk. It has all the building blocks that for the immune system, which is mostly in the gut.
Mm.
And it probably for boys, the biology suggests 6 years. So ideally, at least at night, you're still breastfeeding. Now, yeah, lots of discouragement for that, I
Yeah.
tell you.
Yeah. Wow. That's a real paradigm shift when I think about how I was raised and
Yeah.
the stories that I've taken on and unlearning. Yeah, that's amazing.
Again, that's that disgust with being an animal. Right?
Yes. Yes.
There's something about that. You can't be too sensual. A little sex with your spouse, okay, if you have to.
Right.
But otherwise, don't pay attention to your body. Just be up here in your head, and get your work done.
Yeah. 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 So indigenous folks really seem to flip all those narratives upside down, which is such a gift that we can still learn from these people and their ways, which is how we were as a species for so much of our evolution and development. I mean, we're just really like, it's such a brief moment of time that we have this so-called civilized way of living. So it's really vital that we learn about, reflect upon, integrate these different ways of being that indigenous cultures can show us, teach us.
Yeah, it's only been a few hundred years where we kind of forgot everything, and industrialization, capitalism, colonization, all that stuff is now pushed it all over the world. And you got, the corporations advertising this or that, and everyone forgets what's good for us and just goes for whatever is advertised to us. And so a lot of forgetting has happened.
Mm-hmm.
And forced wage labor, right? Because people used to just, wherever they were born, they raise a garden, and some animals and, barter and stuff. And then you don't have to work so hard. But now uh, the wealthy have taken over the commons and private ownership. Then, you can't go off to the woods and hunt an animal. They took them those common lands away in Europe and then here. So it's, yeah, it forces people into the factories, which was the intent. back when industrialism came about. So we're kind of in the mess of that, just only a few 100 years old. But we've been around for millions of years, people. We don't have to put up with this anymore, right?
Yeah, yeah, we can choose to see this as just kind of a strange detour and really
Yeah,
begin to strike a path that's more toward balance, that's for sure.
yeah.
So you have a PhD, and so you've been very steeped in the academia, scientific community. You work at a university, right? And so I'm wondering how learning about indigenous wisdom, traditions, and practices, ways of living, how you've integrated that into your approach to scientific study. Like if any things have like really informed you and maybe changed the way in which you've done things, because modern scientific orientation is in stark contrast to indigenous ways of knowing in many, many important ways. So I'm curious to see how you've integrated that in your life and work.
Well, I grew up in a fundamentalist Christian home. And so science was a no-no, business no-no,
Mm,
intellectualism no-no. That's the realm of Caesar. We're separate from that, and you have to, keep yourself at a distance. And I've done it all now. So much for that. Yeah, so I had multiple careers before. So I was a music major in college. I was pipe organ, became a church organist and music teacher in the Philippines one year, and then I wanted to answer that question: what's wrong with people? Why is the world so unfair? And so I went to seminary to try to find the answer. Oh, theology will tell me. Well, original sin is not a very satisfactory answer. So,
no fun, that's for sure.
no, it didn't seem right because
Yeah.
I then also, you mentioned, you quoted me saying about my frozen brain. So I had the frozen brain issue in seminary. My professor called on me the first uh, day of having a small group meeting with our papers we had submitted. And he said, "Oh, I loved your paper. Tell us about it." Oh, frozen brain. Can't
Mm,
think, can't talk, can't do anything. And yet morality in the Western world is about reasoning, reasoning and, finding out what the proper thing, the best thing to do is, and then, making yourself do it.
mhm, mhm,
Willing it. Well, I couldn't do anything. I couldn't reason and I couldn't will myself to do anything. So it was like, something's wrong here.
mm,
Well, it took me a while to get back to figuring that out. After seminary, had my own business, teaching super learning to adults, using super learning to teach Spanish to adults. And then I worked in the middle school, prep school for a few years. And then in the middle of that, I found the field of moral development. I thought, aha, this is going to answer the question: what's wrong with everybody and me? And then I get my PhD in that, and the focus still in that area of moral development is on reasoning, right? And it started to just not make enough sense, especially when the U.S. went to war with Iraq on no reasons, no flimsy rationale, right? And I was out there protesting with millions others around the world, and then I read widely, what's wrong with and I found hunter-gatherer childhoods. I found affective neuroscience, animal neuroscience, and how we share so many of these systems. And then I found interpersonal neurobiology, which is about how you're shaped, your brain, and you're engraved by your early experience. And putting it all together was the evolved nest then concept that,
mhm,
this bears on morality, because when you get stressed, your blood flow shifts away from your higher order thinking and mobilizes you for running away or fighting, right? You're not going to think well. You're not going to be open minded, open hearted, right? And so you have to pay attention to the neurobiological shaping of the individual. And then, it's certainly much more complicated than that to look at the society. But So that started to give me some answers. In my frozen brain, I see where that comes from. And now I can work on methods to heal.
Yeah. Yeah, because it's a shift into really understanding more how the environment shapes us, how our context shapes us. And as far as I know, indigenous wisdom is very much more connected to that, embedding themselves, you mentioned earlier, in the web of life, in context. Many languages tend to be more like kind of verb based, you know, it's living languages, it's not noun based like ours. And
Yeah, and I forgot to say that my 2014 book, where I'm trying to wrestle all this out, the neurobiology and the development of human morality, I had to add a subtitle, Evolution, Culture, and Wisdom, because I started to realize, whoa, the only way to fix this is to get back to indigenous wisdom. And part of that is the evolved nest.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm, yeah. So tell us a bit more about that. What does it mean to get back to indigenous wisdom?
Yeah, so I've with my colleague Four Arrows, he and I wrote the book together, kind of a dialogue book on restoring the kinship worldview. We took 28 quotes from different, mostly Native Americans, and then we a dialogue about them. And they're different. The 28 things are from his long list of now 51 precepts that contrast the indigenous worldview with the dominant culture's worldview. And so we talk about, how you shift back to the indigenous way of thinking. So indigenous wisdom has to do with that overall worldview that we can all adopt. We just have to realize that we don't have to be agree with this water we're swimming in, this cultural waters. They're all kind of nuts. But you stand back from it, you realize, oh, we don't have to be that way, and all our ancestors were not that way. So there's indigenous wisdom, but there's also traditional ecological knowledge.
Mm. Mm-hmm.
Traditional ecological knowledge is that land-based understanding of how to get along here with these animals, these plants, these river waterways, these mountains, this soil, and to, the language of the local community comes from the landscape, from the land, from the soil, from earth. So that's honoring that traditional ecological knowledge we also have to honor. But we can all take up the indigenous worldview.
Mm. Mm. Yeah. Yeah, that's that's one of the I think that definitely is a step on the pathway, which is becoming more intimate with your immediate ecology and developing relationship with the many intelligences, um, living beings, energies, flows, and forces that you are embedded in. The thing is that we think, and oftentimes we kind of don't really rely on our immediate ecology, right? Having a globalized world in the way that we do, where so many of the resources people are using day to day to survive are coming from other places, sometimes from across the world. And so there's this inherent disconnection, dislocation, just through the way we live in today's globalized culture. So there is this very intentional and difficult need that we have to re-embed ourselves in our immediate ecology. But the incentive isn't really there for a lot of people, which is a very difficult and disheartening thing to witness, recognize.
Yeah, I agree. And nature immersion, nature connection, nature partnership is one of the evolved nest components.
Mm.
Evolved nest, soothing perinatal experience, breastfeeding for several years. Those are just for young children. The rest are for all of us. So welcoming social climate, so we all feel like we belong, like we matter, we have something to contribute. and affectionate touch. No negative touch. As I mentioned earlier, you can misdirect development in early life with negative touch. So you always want to have positive, and we need it to develop our vagus nerve and our oxytocin system. Then there's play, self-directed free play. We talked about that. Multiple nurturers, responsive relationships. So in babyhood, that means relationships that keep the baby calm. But we all need mentors throughout life. We all need to be listened to, right? And then nature connection and immersion connection, and then restorative healing practices, because we as humans make bad choices, mess things up, and get dysregulated and out of balance, and we need regular practices to get back in balance in our mental, physical health, but also in our relational.
Mm-hmm. I'd love to hear an example of that, a restorative healing practice.
Sure. So the San people, when John Young asked them about, well, how often do you have a healing ceremony? And so a healing ceremony there is, they call it boiling energy. You're dancing, you're singing, drumming, and you have healers who lay hands on those who need it, and they can go for hours and hours in the evening, overnight. And when they said, well, probably every week, but if there's grieving to be done, every day. So it depends, right? But it's community drumming, getting that rhythm together. You're getting your biorhythms back in shape as a member of the earth community, as the human community. And then you have the chance, the singing helps you get back, and the dancing helps you get back in balance.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think there's this tendency to think of healing as in healing something that is like hurt or broken, as like to respond to something that's hurt or broken, rather than having this more kind of proactive orientation of like, life is going to hurt and break you. So let's just keep a rhythm with these healing and connection practices in community, in ecology, so that you just have that kind of rhythmic healing power always going. And you reminded me when you're saying if you're grieving, you have to tend to it every day. Francis Weller has this amazing book called The Wild Edge of Sorrow. And he just mentions briefly in there where he was in, I think, Africa, in this small community, talking to this woman. And he said, "You're like the happiest woman I've ever met. How are you so happy?" And she says, "Because I cry every day."
Yeah.
Yeah. So there's this like real pulse of life that is balanced in the grief and the love, the pain and the joy, the sorrow and the happiness, and that the more active and proactive we can be in like generating that rhythm. And you mentioned dance, drumming, like actually creating rhythm and exploring these things together, that it makes sense that we'd be able to, I guess, grow and evolve and stay connected to that pulse of life.
Yeah, and let the emotions flow through us. So we're dynamic systems, right? So the things are always flowing around us. If you hang on to your grief or your resentment or whatever it is, you're gonna stop growing. You're gonna get ill in some way.
Mm-hmm.
And to understand that this is a dynamic, flowing world, that we're always sharing our quirks with one another, and we're always sharing our vibratory beingness with others. And so you really were to be a moral person, to be a virtuous person, you have to let those flows come and go, so that you can actually again be in a state of wisdom to receive the divine energies of the universe, which are going to orient you to oneness, are going to orient you to heart connectedness, right? Unlike if you're hanging on, you get down into a small self instead of the big self that we are. We're a common self with everyone else, every other person, some of which are not human, on the planet. We are one, right? And to really get back into that flow of being. And then we'll be intelligent, then we'll be wise. When we get back to that way of understanding ourselves as earthlings, responsible to be fellow members and enhancers of life instead of dominators.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So recently, do you know who Bio Akomolafe is?
Yeah.
Yeah. I really appreciate his writing, and I've listened to many talks of him. I actually interviewed him for this project. He was the first episode. Really look up to him. And recently I have heard him talking about the contrast between morality and ethics. And so he talks about morality as being static and rule-based, often anthropocentric, while ethics is dynamic, relational, more connected to a sense of interbeing. And so I'm wondering how that distinction resonates with you, since you have so much focus on morality in your work. How might these ideas apply to what you've learned?
Yeah, I like the distinction. I wouldn't necessarily call one morality and one ethics. People use those terms interchangeably and they mix them all up. So I use them the same. So
Mm-hmm.
when I work in the public schools, I'll call it ethics because otherwise the parents get worried. Morality, you're going to teach morality, and they think it's associated with sexuality. Yeah, it's much easier just to talk about ethics and ethical development. But the field itself calls itself moral development, and they mean it in a broad way, and they mostly mean reasoning. Like, so yeah, I like the rigid thing versus the flow relational thing. Yeah, I see that as indigenous wisdom and morality versus the Western kind of a left brain dominated way of being.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So what are some key, we're coming to the end of this. I'd love to tie it up with kind of like I guess like a vision of what could be, like what is kind of an ethical orientation to the years to come, so that we can nurture communities that are more ecologically reciprocal, honoring of children. I'd love to just hear your thoughts on kind of envisioning how to move forward in a really ethically sound way. Yeah.
Yeah, well, the way I think of myself is I'm on a web of relationships. I'm like a spider on a web, right? And every time I move, think, feel, act, I'm reverberating across the world, really. I mean, you can't see it so much, but it's happening. So I'm responsible then to be calm, to be centered, to be healthy in various ways. And to let go of those angry thoughts and let the flow get out of here if it's revenge or whatever, and not nurse those angry feelings, and instead cultivate loving kindness in myself, so that that's what I'm reverberating. And so at evolveness.org, we have 28 days of self-calming, for people who are kind of not get out of balance easily. Find the techniques that work for you, and then you do them daily. And then the relational piece. A lot of people now, you talked about how the younger folks aren't getting as much play, and they're getting much more, screen time instead. And that doesn't conduce to, being flexibly attuned to others. And so, or you don't even feel safe with others. Intimacy requires the vagus nerve to be working properly, or else, you just get too stressed out and you freeze or whatever. So having moments where you play, and then with my college students, we would play folk song games. So you're singing, a hunting we will go, a hunting we will go. We'll catch a little fox and put him in a box, and then we'll let him go. And you're holding hands, you're singing, your vagus nerve is going, your right hemisphere is growing, you're laughing. All that is so healthy. Do things like that together so that you bring up, you're able to actually enjoy being with others. I think a lot of people need some of that healing. And then to expand your imagination, to understand that you are part of Earth and that we are all connected, to know that we share 50% of our DNA with bananas and 60% with mushrooms, and, you know, with one another, it's like 99.999%. We're the same, we're together. So to expand all that, and then at the same time on the ground to provide the evolved nest, to provide it to the babies. So that means we have to change policies. So we have paid parental leave in the United States, for example, and then to nest one another. And we are launching a nesting ambassador program in February. And that's where we want to help people all over the world, whoever's interested, to find ways to be apply the nest wherever they are in whatever walk of life they're in, so that we can all be agents of change, transformers, nest ambassadors wherever we are, so that we get back to our real selves as human beings, our real species normal way of being compassionate towards one another and Earth.
Yeah, beautiful. So well said. I love this. You just really grounded it in me there at the end, like this idea of like tend to your nest. What does it mean to really nest, to be nested, to have to deepen into the art of nestedness with each other? What does that really mean? And if you take the time to cultivate that orientation, I think it does begin to sensitize you to the web of life, to your relationships, your connections, how your environment is forming and shaping you, and how you are in turn then forming and shaping it. So I love this idea, starting to put more attention toward the nest. Yeah.
Very nice.
Great. Darcia, do you want to, so people, if they're interested in this program that's starting in February, can they get to that through your website, or how would you direct folks to that?
The place to start right now is to sign up for our newsletter at evolvednest.org. If you go there, you'll have a chance to do that. And then eventually we'll have a website called Nested World. It's just not up yet. So.
Okay, cool. And I'll get this out as soon as possible then, if that's happening in February, because people might be really interested in that. Yeah. Okay. Great. Well, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.